Hey everyone, as we get closer to the release of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, more and more anticipation builds up and more people wish to know just what we can expect as a day one experience. A few days ago, I put out a video discussing my quote-unquote expectations as day one monsters lineup that we should be seeing as the game drops on the 30th. But I also mentioned that we didn't have the full picture. In this video, I want to try to shed some more light on those speculations that I mentioned before and perhaps get to the bottom of just what that final monster for Sunbreak will not only look like, but also act like. There's a few clarifications that I need to get out of the way first. We're still treating this all as speculation on my part, even though there's tons of signs pointing us in the proper direction, and I feel very confident in making these rather speculations / predictions / suggestions. If you're looking for more concrete details, I suggest you look at Twitter since I really can't get too specific here for obvious reasons until the games drop. Another thing that is worth pointing out is that the pre-download for the game is now live in most parts of the world. And just like the demo before it, people have begun to, let's just say, take a closer look. And so the majority of what we'll be discussing today is right online with what's been said so far. So on top of talking about the Sunbreak monsters, I'll also be discussing some of the details regarding the stages / maps that we'll be seeing as well. There's much more to go over regarding monsters and maps, of course, but since I wanted to keep things relatively short and concise, we'll just focus on that for now. I know that in the last video, people were asking me in the comments to talk about the Master Rank armors, Rampage decorations, and even the story, and in due time, hopefully before launch, I can get to those as well. So with all the table setting out of the way, and I apologize for the long introduction, let's get started. So first and foremost, one of the things that I speculated, and of course this is all speculation, was the fact that 17 monsters were going to be making the experience full in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Essentially, we know of 13 of them so far. Malzeno, Garangom, Luna Garen, Blood Orange Bishaten, Aurora Somnicath, Pyrak Nakadaki, Magma Almudron, Daimyo Hermitor, Shogun Senator, Astalos, Seregios, Espinas, and Gore Magala. Now there's 4 more monsters to round out those 17, and I basically suggested that, of course, what if Gore Magala, instead of basically purple, what if he was gold? And what if he had eyes all of a sudden? That's essentially one of the monsters that we could potentially expect to see in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. That would be one of the first returning monsters appearing. Of course, there's another returning monster that we could also talk about, but before I do that, I do want to point out that someone did reach out in the comments and asked me if, what about if Chaos Gore Magala made an appearance in Sunbreak? And I think that makes the most amount of sense with the understanding that so far we just simply have no indications that Chaos would be added in. Perhaps it would be one of those free title updates that we know are going to be coming. There's going to be 4 of them in total. We don't necessarily have the full picture of those just yet. We don't necessarily know what to expect when it comes to that, but probably Chaos making an appearance in a free title update makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Transitioning over to the second returning monster, we mentioned that, of course, Super Saiyan Rajang essentially is going to be there. That would be Furious Rajang, is one of those monsters that we can easily expect there to be making an appearance in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. If you don't necessarily know much about Furious Rajang, he's in a constant state of enrage, essentially making him full Super Saiyan the whole time. He can independently boost each one of his arms, making him more powerful. He's also missing a tail, which someone pointed out in the comments. I wasn't necessarily aware of that. I guess he's more upset that he's missing his tail more than anything. Therefore, he's a little bit pissed off the entire time, and you know, that's understandable. Now this is where we're going to begin to speculate, and again, this is all speculation on my part, is on the other 2 monsters that we should be expecting to round out that 17. Essentially, we do expect there to be a Magdamalo variant of some sort, but what if he was, let's say, just for the sake of saying it, what if he was a little bit more red because he's more angry, kind of like scorned, if you will, a little bit more upset? What if he was missing an eye? Would that be interesting? I think it would, because remember, like in anime, if a character is missing an eye, he's a little bit more like dangerous, he's a little bit more experienced, so you know, one of those ideas certainly flies. So what if his blades were a little bit longer as well? That's just, you know, all speculation on my part, but that would make this Magdamalo really stand out for sure. It wouldn't necessarily be the same Magdamalo, it would just be slightly different, therefore is new. So that is something that we can probably expect there to be. I was hoping originally that it would have some sort of different Hellblight element alongside with it, maybe a bleed added to it or something like that. It could still be a possibility. It will certainly go a long way from just making it different by cutting out one of his eyes and putting an eye patch on it. So, who knows? Now, the final monster, I think, gets a little bit more tricky because essentially it's kind of hard to guess what it could possibly look like. Someone did mention in the comments before, if I ever seen the movie Pacific Rim, which I have, and there's a monster there called Orochi, and then you're going to be seeing an image right there of this monster. And what if Orochi had crystals all over his back? Just for the sake of having it, right? Little bit of a color contrast, a blue mouth, kind of weird amalgamation type mouth, very Ibushi-like, Narwa-like. But what if it had crystals all over his back? Just for contrast, right? Because the crystals are red, the mouth is blue. It's just a little bit of throwing off, the colors right there. So this is something that I'm actually going to be splicing into this video here. Specifically, I had to do this post processing for the video, but essentially something that I wanted to touch upon and something that I talked about in the last video was the fact that there's a direct connection, or I think there will be a direct connection. Again, this is all theory, that there is a direct connection between Malzeno and this ugly boy right here with the crystals. Essentially, something that I noticed, and then you're going to be seeing a little clip right there playing right there. Essentially, when you take down Malzeno in the hunt, in the demo, this is something that you can see in the game right now. If you choose to play the demo, if you're strong enough to beat Malzeno, if you're clever enough to actually just basically kind of mess around with him a little bit and take him down, what you're going to notice is that the flying giggies, and this would be the little creatures that are flying around, that are sucking out the life force out of everything surrounding Malzeno as he chooses to attack it. Basically, I noticed that when he dies after the animation, they leave his body altogether. They keep mentioning that there's some symbiotic relationship between Malzeno and the flying giggies. But when you notice that Malzeno dies, essentially they leave the body and they're not interested in sticking around for basically being slaughtered by the hunter themselves, or basically dying off since they have no host to essentially provide life force to. One of the things that I theorized at that point in time when I made that last video was essentially that the flying giggies are not really symbiotic with Malzeno. They're symbiotic with the final boss, and they use Malzeno, essentially, this was the theory that I provided, they use Malzeno's daunting aura to protect themselves and essentially be with the top dominant monster in the area, but they're constantly siphoning off life force, or essentially providing the life force to whatever the final boss is, therefore the red crystals on his back. This was something that on the day that I noticed basically that I took down Malzeno, it just kind of didn't necessarily sit right with me to see this flying giggies kind of just fly off. If they're symbiotic, they're just going to sit there and die with the host. That's usually what happens. But when they're flying off and they're doing their own thing, it's like, no, these guys are traitors. They're working for someone else. Therefore, someone else would be this boy with the crystals and the weird ugly mouth. That was something that I theorized at that time. Now I feel very confident in saying that I think it's something that we should be expecting to see going forward. It might also have to be connected with the frenzy itself. This is something that we also theorized a little bit on, since Gore Magala is back, and a potential golden version of Gore Magala could also be making an appearance. And I know I called it earlier Chaos. Gore Magala is chaotic. Gore Magala, I actually got that wrong. But, same thing. And at the end of the day, if he's also added into the game, presumably post-launch, that could also make, a little bit of an interesting twist regarding the entire frenzied idea. So those are the things that I definitely wanted to make sure that I hit upon as we continue the video. And what if it just kind of walked around on 4 legs and just looked really weird for no good reason? Think of it like a Frankenstein's monster, if you will. A little bit of an amalgamation of different monsters, different parts, different pieces, with all kind of combining together to create a real abomination. Think of it that way. So maybe that is what Capcom would end up doing. I certainly have no idea what they would choose to do that. But I think it would be really interesting for a new monster to just kind of be this weird creature thing with crystals all over his back and a big weird mouth, kind of like Ibushi. Certainly would be fascinating to see, but hopefully Capcom does have that day one trailer, set to drop, and we get to see it teased just a little bit. Now, one of the things that I did not necessarily talk about in my last video that I certainly wanted to touch upon was, of course, the stages. This is something that people ask me as well. Are we getting more stages? And I guess what they're talking about is stages kind of like the Citadel or the jungle. And other than that, like big stages that you're actually going to be able to explore, I don't think that is something that we can expect. But what we can expect, though, is different arenas. Remember that Forlorn Arena, this would be the one that Capcom already confirmed, so I'm not breaking any news here. Capcom did confirm that Forlorn Arena for Lucent Nargacuga is going to be a free title update. We don't expect that to be there on day one. But what we can expect is perhaps another stage be there for perhaps one of these monsters, or perhaps something different there, just a new arena for the sake of having it. So it would be interesting, you know, to have some sort of like abyss, kind of like a big, deep crevice type stage, kind of faking you out a little bit, making you think like, this stage is kind of boring, it's making me yawn, it's making me a little bit sleepy, but at the same time it is an abyss, so it's a little bit interesting on its own. So it's certainly worth considering. Now, the last one that I want to talk about is perhaps the return of a Guiding Lance 2.0. Now, this is something that's been suggested by a couple of people, and this is something that we can perhaps begin to surmise based on, you know, just some suggestions we've seen out there. Of course, there's no concrete evidence of anything like that, or even if it would be the same mechanic. Remember that the Guiding Lance was very much one of those places that you kind of like put together based on some rewards or something along those lines. You can even level it up, which I don't necessarily know if people were really happy with that mechanic ultimately, since I don't really think it made all that much of a difference once you hit a certain threshold. So perhaps the Guiding Lance 2.0 would be in the works. It would be something that perhaps they could just take some of those previous stages that we already had in Rise, and it would kind of just mix up that idea that I mentioned before, where you are having some of the older maps tweaked a little bit in a certain way, maybe with a different weather, a different day of light, a different effect, kind of like happening in the map. And it's still just kind of like still the same assets of the old map, but just kind of like put together in a different way. Of course, this is all speculation on my part. There's no way to know, but it could also be the way that they could really give us a brand new map without really giving us a brand new map, since they're just reusing assets altogether. And that was the entire point of the Guiding Lance. They basically didn't necessarily want to give us a new map. Hoarfrost Reach, I believe, was the only map that they added, but then they added the Guiding Lance, kind of like mixing in all the ancient forests, Wellspire Waste, Coral Highlands and stuff. They just kind of mixed them all up into this specific area. So it could be one way to go about it now, again with Sunbreak, with the understanding that they changed some of the mechanics around and they basically do something a little bit different but while still remaining similar. But that's about all the information that I wanted to go over with you guys today. Hopefully I was able to share a little bit more and clear a couple of more things that people did ask me regarding Sunbreak. Of course, more information is going to be coming out. Again, review copies are out. Preloads are already available there. Therefore, people are going to be posting more information as well. And of course, Twitter is always full of information if you know where to look. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching.